Hello, everyone. Welcome to the BIPOC panel. We will begin. We ask everybody in the panel to introduce themselves, and we'll just do 1 minute, okay? Make sure you just take a minute to do that, and we will all introduce ourselves. We will start with Roy Barron. Oh, hang on, Roy is not looking. Well, then let's start with Diego. Hi, everybody. My name is Diego Guerra. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a proud native of the Rio Grande Valley. I was born and raised there for 18 years in a mainstream school. Then I went to Austin, Texas, lived there for 10 years, and I have just moved to Minneapolis. And so, yeah, it's been a big change being in the North for sure. I work for the National Deaf Center on post-secondary outcomes as the community coordinator. So thank you all for inviting me and happy to be here. Thank you for being here. Thanks for joining us. Let's move on to Roy. Which Roy? There are two Roys in the room. Roy Jones. Hi, I'm Roy Jones. I'm from Texas. And I am from Jacksonville, Texas, which is near Dallas, Tyler, if you're familiar with the area. And I've been in Austin for more than 20 years. I love Austin. It is my home. So I'm here with my parents, helping them. They live here as well. I come from a deaf family, multi-generational deaf family. We lost count of how many generations. I guess it's more than like 12 or 13 generations of deaf family. So I have deaf nieces, nephews, everybody in the family is deaf, which we're very, very proud of. And Latoya says, thank you so much. Let's move on to Roy Barron. Thank you so much. Yes, Roy, I hope your parents are doing well. My name is Roy Barron. This is my sign name, and I have been in Maryland. I graduated from Gallaudet University with a BA in ASL, and then I moved to Texas, and I've been here for 7 years. I will soon become certified as an interpreter, working here in Austin, and so I look forward to seeing all of you and also sharing my experience here today. And I'm a heavy user of interpreters in multiple settings. So yes, I think that's enough for the moment. Yep. Latoya says, yes, let's move on to Caesar. Hey there, my name is Cesar Rocha, and I was born in West Texas in El Paso, then moved to Austin, moved around to a few other places. I have a lawn care business, and I can only see 4 of you. I'm on my phone, so I can't see everybody on the panel. But yes, and here I am. I'm out in the field. Latoya says, thank you so much. Thanks for joining the panel today. Deidre? Yes, my name is Deidre. I moved here 2 years ago from Arizona. I'm originally from San Diego, California, and I work as at an administrative assistant in Gallaudet University, and now work at Austin Community College. So my goal is to become a CDI, Certified Deaf Interpreter. I think that's it for me right now, but looking forward to participating today.
Wonderful. Okay, and so now we have a list of questions, but before we begin the questions, I am curious to know if the panel is important, if this panel of BIPOC folks is important, and how it would help. And
Where's
let
the,
us begin.
how do we know who to answer?
We're going to begin with Roy Barron.
Okay, this is Roy. Before I give my answer, again, this is just based on my opinion and based on my experiences. Of course, future experiences may change my answer. My answer to the first question, for this panel, is it important for the students? It absolutely is. It's important for you to listen to these experiences and to develop expertise in interpreting with BIPOC people. In my experience, my mother is Black, my father is white. And so I went through a lot of gray areas navigating while growing up. And so um, I guess I may need some time to develop my answer, but I'll let others jump in at this point.
This is Roy Jones. I'd like to say something. Go ahead, Roy. Perfect. Yes, I think it is important that BIPOCs are part of this panel. Reason being is that often, and I speak from personal experience, uh, as someone who went to mainstream school, went to a deaf school, used interpreters in different settings, and almost all the interpreters that I worked with were white interpreters. I think that in my entire life using interpreters, I've seen maybe three or four interpreters of color. So I think that it's very important to have BIPOC deaf consumers as part of a panel so that we can share our experiences, whether it's regarding oppression or incompatibility, being culturally incompatible. So I think that it's important that we educate people on the cultural differences as a consumer and also the interpreter and how we can work together. I think it's really important.
Latoya says yes. Let's move on to Diego next. Okay, and Diego says, yes, I think it's very important, as Roy Jones and Roy Barron both said. We will be sharing our personal experiences. We will be sharing our opinions on how important it is for the field of interpreting to understand that there are a lot of layers. This is not a linear way of understanding what interpreting means in the field. So, for example, I know that the field of interpreters is very, very full of white women, and they have their own norms, their own way of doing things. Does that apply with consumers of different cultures? Not necessarily. And so we want to challenge your expectations of what those norms are for the field of interpreting, talk about errors that may happen and how we can navigate those. So yes, I think this is a good opportunity for you all to examine yourselves, to ask questions and think about how you can improve as an interpreter so that you can work with many, many different people.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Diego. We have one other person who has joined us, Juan. Welcome, Juan. And why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Juan? Sorry, I was late. Um, Now, as a Latinx person, I value my heritage. And while I agree about diversity, as people belonging to Latino cultures, we see things very differently. And I don't mean that we want you to be extremely uh, helpful, as in like where it becomes patronizing. But we want you to be sensitive, uh, like perhaps maybe in your dress. Uh, Folks, may come from a socially economically deprived background, and if you come in looking very expensive, so to speak, it might make them feel inferior. And then there's other issues to take into consideration. And when I speak of Latino communities, I'm not speaking of just Mexicans. Oftentimes when somebody says it's a Spanish speaking setting, they think automatically Mexico, but that's not the case. We have to take into consideration other parts of the Spanish speaking regions like Central America, South America, and so on and so forth.
Latoya says, yes, thank you so much. So now, anybody who has not yet answered, I'm looking to see if there's somebody who hasn't answered yet.
Roy Jones says, I think.
Deidre?
Deidre.
Diego says, Deidre, not me. And Lynn says, let me find. Yes, hello, everybody. I grew up mainstreamed. I was the only deaf person amongst hearing classmates, and I saw use mostly white interpreters throughout my education. And I didn't think too much of it until I came to the university and I finally saw a Black interpreter. That really threw me off because I was not used to the way that that interpreter interpreted for me. But I realized, you know what, we share a language. And this interpreter is really interpreting what I am actually saying, the spirit of what I'm saying. I had been filtered by white interpreters for so long, I was not used to that. And so I went through my education at the university with a Black interpreter. And, again, you have to think about the skill of the interpreter. It's also how the interpreter views the deaf person's tone, their intent, their message. You really have to match that. So yeah.
That is correct. Latoya says that is absolutely correct. Okay, now I think the final person is Cesar. Go ahead, Cesar. Well, I think that choice is very important. Do you all remember when VRS had a preferential access where you can choose the type of interpreter you wanted to work with, whether it was ethnicity or race based? And so I could pick a Latinx interpreter who would probably understand me better, my history, and also wanting to work with the same interpreter consistently. And so I wish that they could reinstate that, um, that they could give us those options. But I don't know if it's possible here in the Austin area. It's predominantly white interpreters, but I think maybe sometime down the future that could be possible.
Latoya says, yes, that's a great idea. Juan, did you have something to say? Juan says, yes, I just wanted to add, again, I'm a man, and so I identify as a man, and I know that the field is very full of women. We do need more men, and we do need more Latinx and people of color in the field, much, much more, so that consumers can feel comfortable with an interpreter of the same identity. And so again, there's that sense of machismo or macho for me coming from the culture. And so I would like to have somebody who shares that. Roy Jones. I just wanted to say that believe people's stories. Again, there is a lack of BIPOC interpreters. That doesn't mean that all white interpreters must be shown the door. That's not the case at all. It just means that white interpreters need to do their work to understand the consumers who are different from them, to interact with those communities, to learn to match them, how to produce culturally appropriate signs or understand them. And so again, the best interpretation for me is thinking about how individuals can work with people who are different from them. So it's not that white interpreters don't have a place, right? Again, we all want to have access to communication. It's just that we notice a lack currently in the amount of interpreters of color. And we would like to grow that just so that there are more options to choose from as deaf consumers.
Absolutely, that is correct. Now, we're going to go ahead and begin asking the questions that we have on the list. Question number one: what advice do you have for beginner interpreters when they are assigned to interpret for people of different cultures? And any one of you can go ahead and respond to that question. Anybody? Deidre, go ahead.
Hmm.
Yes, go ahead. I think that most importantly, get out of your shell. Go out and meet other people. Don't stick to the common places like the coffee shop, the deaf night out at the coffee shop. Go to other places. Find, let's say, maybe volunteer at the deaf school. Uh, go to the community college, the local community college, and see what resources they have to inform you of events that are happening. Get out of your comfort zone so that you can be exposed to a variety of people, their different ways of expressing themselves, and it'll improve your receptive skills. So that would be my message. Get out of your comfort zone.
Latoya here, great. Yes, Roy Barron, did you have a comment? Yes, this is Roy. I was on mute. Make sure that I'm on mute, sorry. Not so great with technology. I just wanted to explain a little bit about my own cultural background. Again, I grew up in a predominantly white school, and I did not have any Black teachers until I went to university. So sorry. I've got to run and catch that little one before he gets away. Latoya says that's fine. Does anybody else want to add anything? Diego?
Yes, I agree with what Deidre said. For beginner interpreters or even expert interpreters who've been working in the field for many years, it really doesn't matter. If you're assigned to a job by an agency or directly, and if your instincts tell you that you're not a right match, you tell the agency, I'm not a right fit. Can you find somebody else to replace me? Advocate for yourself. When you feel that something's not right, go ahead and speak out. Just do it. Now, when you want to learn more, uh, uh, I encourage you not to get out of every single job. Find a mentor. Fight for a good mentor. Work with that mentor. And so then once you feel ready to take on those types of assignments, then you can do so. But if at if at any time you find a assignment that you've been assigned to that you don't feel comfortable with, then decline it. That would be my message.
Latoya says yes. Cesar, did you want to make a comment? Cesar, did you want to add something? Cesar says, oh, sorry, I have a limited screen. Yes. I wanted to mention communication by hand. The interpreting agency, you can let them know your preferred interpreters, let them know who's on a list, and you can email the list to the coordinator who you like to work with so that you have your preferred interpreters come to your jobs. Um, most of the time, they try to meet my requests. So that's something that I would suggest that you can request your preferred interpreters from the office or any interpreting agency.
Yes. We have a question from Jody. Go ahead with your question, Jody. Jody? Okay, thank you. Okay, we've got Jody on. Sorry about that. Um, do you see me okay? Okay, going back to the topic of going out and socializing with different people, absolutely, I agree with that. However, I also think that we need to be observant of the boundaries. There are times and places to do that. We have to respect deaf culture and their need to hold space for themselves and not allow us to trespass over those or just cross those lines. So how do we manage that?
Yes, Roy Jones, did you want to respond to that? Um, Roy here. Yes, I know that interpreters have their ethics and their own boundaries, and I think that it's important for interpreters to get to know deaf people. So, for example, if I'm assigned an interpreter in a class or in another job and we have lunchtime, maybe that interpreter and I could go out to lunch together because maybe I'm going to be working with them for that entire class. So there's an opportunity to get to know each other. They will know my personality and character. Maybe we have lunch together a few times, or maybe we sit and talk during break to get to know each other. I think that is something that's important. Also, how you reach out to deaf people, how you find events in the community and take advantage of those events, go to them. Don't just go to the deaf club or don't just go to the same old spaces. Go to spaces that you want to be in with deaf people. I mean, you can always come to deaf spaces when you are welcome, but just try to not take over while you're there and take people's time. I think it's important to get to know people, to get to know the culture and learn from them. And then you will be more aware of which spaces are a good match for you. So I am Black and also identify as white and gay and an artist. So I look for spaces that I feel comfortable in and that fit me. And I'm going to look for an interpreter that is going to fit those places too. I want somebody who's going to represent my style well.
Yes. One other question coming from Dallas. Go ahead, Dallas. Okay, we're going to wait until Dallas's video pops up. So bear with us. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Got the video up. Hello, everyone. Hi, Roy. Hello again. Hi. My question has to do with deaf interpreters or certified deaf interpreters, BIPOC, CDIs working with white interpreters, and that experience. How, what is that like to work with a white hearing interpreter as a CDI, a BIPOC CDI? Do you work on word choice and what would work in terms of your personality? Um, have there been instances where the words don't match up? The word that the white interpreter would use is not the way that you would use it. I'm just maybe just your experiences, general experiences working with white interpreters, and how you can fit and make it work. If I have not been clear, I can try asking the question again. Was was that clear? Was my question clear? Deidre wants to answer that question.
Oh, I was just saying, I understand the question. Yes, that was clear. In response, I typically communicate with the interpreter. And also, you have to know about the event that you're interpreting. What is it about? Is it a Black Lives Matter event? Is it going to be a protest march? It's important to know what the attitude and the spirit of the event is, as well as the content. So it's important to be on the same page with the interpreter that you're working with. Um, and of course, I will always use my own personal signing style. I may not necessarily follow the style of the white interpreter who's feeding me. I will use my own language and my own comfort. And so, of course, adjust for register as necessary. But yeah.
I would, and Juan would like to add to that comment as well. Yes, this is Juan. If the interpreter is a beginning interpreter, that's wonderful. I'm excited about their enthusiasm. Uh, they want to go out and work, but do watch out for the attitude of just going out to make money. Of course, we all have to make a living, but do be careful about the types of jobs that you get. I know you're trying to make a living, but take into consideration whether you are the appropriate interpreter for the setting. Think about the cultural aspects, the linguistic aspects. Turn down the job if you're not the right person. Yes, you're going to lose some money, but you know what? You have the rest of the year to make up that money in other jobs that are more appropriate. Now, in terms of deaf interpreters working with hearing interpreters, BIPOC CDIs working with white interpreters. It hasn't always been a positive experience. We've had conflict. There was a team of interpreters that I was a part of, a four-team interpreting team. I know Mexican Sign Language, and the white interpreter said, "Oh, I am very experienced. I've worked with the consumers in Texas for many years," and came across very arrogantly. And I was like, "Who cares? I don't care that you've been here in Texas forever, working with this demographic forever. What is important here is to understand the individual need of this particular consumer that we're working with, their linguistic needs, their cultural needs. And so we have to work together to come uh, down, agree on what size we have to use. It's teamwork. And but I've noticed that several white interpreters, they really exploit their privilege, and they tell me that I don't have a place in this space because they have worked with this consumer for many years. They have some type of advantage over me because they have worked with this consumer. But so it's been tough working with those types of interpreters who have that type of attitude. They have to be accepting and recognize that I too come with experience and knowledge and understands a particular linguistic need. I don't know whether they're looking down on me. They think I'm inferior to them because I'm a Latino. Now, I know we're not all perfect and we're learning every day. There's so many different styles that we can learn from each other. But that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Latoya says, yes, thank you so much. One more question. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed Diego. Diego wanted to say something. Diego says, sure, no problem. I just wanted to add that for me personally, I have never experienced working as a CDI with a hearing interpreter. I have not done that. But I do notice that with white interpreters, I do code switch a whole lot. I have to change the way I sign and interact with the white interpreter and then evaluate how they're doing, what is their skill. So I find myself making large adjustments. When I work with the CDI, it's a very interesting experience to have. And it's a really good question to look more into because I know that there is a lot more use of CDI. There's discussion of limited numbers, of people not being very welcomed in the field. But yes, going back to what Dallas says, I hope that this continues to happen and we do see more.
Yes. Roy Jones would like to make a comment. And thank you so much, Diego, for your comment. Uh, I just want to briefly share an experience that I had. I'm talking about a deaf interpreter. I'm not talking about a certified deaf interpreter, but me in the role of deaf interpreting for a friend. And growing up, this friend did not have great accessibility, sign access. This was a friend who moved here from another country, did not have a lot of education, and so I am very skilled at using just do know gestural visual communication, and then my background that includes Black ASL has afforded me that versatility and adaptability. And so we went, and I have been exposed to Mexican Sign Language. And I noticed that as a deaf interpreter and working with another interpreter, and I'm there for the person who needs that accessibility. And I sit there not to be a part of the interpreting process because I'm not certified, but I'm there to watch, monitor how the interpretation is happening and whether there's a mistake, and then I'll intervene and advocate for the consumer and say no, that is not what the person is saying. And so I jump in quite a bit to help out with making sure that the information is the communication is effective. And what I've noticed from the deaf person is that they'll still stare blankly because they're not understanding what is being interpreted to them. And so I have to intervene in those occasions as well and give the deaf person greater context, more details to help them understand what the message that is being interpreted to them is saying. And so I get involved quite a bit. And I notice that this happens a lot with BIPOC consumers. And this enhances their accessibility uh, whenever they have that type of person who is involved in the interpreting process. So I think it's very important to work with certified deaf interpreters, even if you think they don't need it. I think it's important because a CDI does ensure that they get all of the communication and all of the components of that message.
Latoya says, oh, yes, yes, thank you. So now there's a question from Lynn. Just one moment. Okay. Lynn, yes. Hello. So my question, I am a white female interpreter, or I should say interpreting student. How can I support diversity in the interpreting field? How can I do that?
Diego, go ahead and respond to that question.
Um,
Well, one thing that has that came to mind is that if you see that there's an assignment that is better suited to for a BIPOC, then advocate to make sure that the right interpreter is assigned. Do not take the job. Make sure that that job that is better suited for a BIPOC is assigned a BIPOC interpreter. Let's say, for instance, that this is a setting that requires somebody with knowledge of Latino cultures or disability, then advocate for that position to be filled by that person. So make sure that the job you take is the right one for you.
uh, Toria. Toria, you had a question? Yes, hi, my question is if you are using a white interpreter and you feel more comfortable or proud interpreting. I'm sorry,
Roy here, uh, Latoya, Latoya. Roy, you had your hand up. Roy Barron, go ahead and comment. Yes, I do have a comment. Uh, I'm sorry, it might be a little distracting to you because I've got children at home. I could give you two examples. Well, if you have bias, leave it at home. I mean, this applies to any interpreter in any interpreting situation. But a couple of things with that. Um, let's say that there's a memorial for a black person who's passed away, and the audience is predominantly uh, a black audience. Yes, I would recommend a black interpreter. Now, let's say that this is a themed event, but it's a for open to the public, then a white interpreter would be appropriate. Now, if anybody has a different opinion, I'm happy to hear it.
Juan, you want to go ahead? Yes, it doesn't, we're not trying to criticize white interpreters. It may sound that way, but we're really not. You know, how do you feel, how do you present yourself as someone friendly and welcoming? Go to events for deaf people of color. I mean, you know, you may not ever really understand them 100%, but you may feel more comfortable with the culture. So that way, when you get this job, you can become more comfortable. Maybe initially you may not feel you're qualified, but over time, if you continue to expose yourself to different cultures, you may feel more qualified. You know, think about it in the sense of different religions. Are you always a match if your religion, personal religion, does not match the religion of the event or that is centered at the event? Until you feel confident and comfortable, you shouldn't be there because you're going to affect the deaf person. If you are calm and comfortable, they will also feel calm and comfortable. So it's important to socialize with deaf people from different cultures and backgrounds. So you develop that.
Latoya here, yes, that is absolutely true. And now we've got Faith with a question. And Roy Barron says, I think somebody's trying to also respond to the previous question. I can wait for that response. No, no, go ahead. Go ahead. I missed who was saying something. Go ahead, Faith. Uh, no, Diego here. I wanted to thank you, Faith, for giving me the time. I wanted to add to Taylor Flanagan's question. Yes, have a list ready. I know that many agencies will say that they don't have an available person, but did they really take the time and effort to contact the interpreter that we want from our preferred list? There some oftentimes the default is that person's not available, and then they assign whoever they want. So develop personal relationships with BIPOC interpreters, and if you do have that type of relationship, reach out to them and let them know that there's this job that's available, and are they available to take it. Don't put all of the responsibility on the agency. Do some of that work yourself, because agencies do look to cut corners, and they don't actually take on that responsibility thoroughly. So keep that in mind.
Latoya says, thank you so much. Yes, we want to go ahead with the question now. This is Faith. Can you see me? Okay. So my question is, maybe you might have finished answering it, but in general, as a white or not BIPOC interpreter, how do we make sure that deaf people feel safe, feel comfortable, feel like you can speak up for yourself? How do you do that? I mean, I don't like that word help, but you know what I mean? Like, how can, in the situation as a non-BIPOC interpreter, how can we do that?
Roy Barron here. Uh, Latoya saying Deidre has a response. Go ahead, Deidre. And then after Deidre, Roy Barron can respond. Okay, great. Um, Often before an appointment, what typically happens, and it doesn't matter what type of appointment, maybe it's the eye doctor or a general practitioner appointment. Now, you meet with the interpreter before the assignment begins, and this is to establish an understanding, to feel the vibe, to make sure that the interpreter is understanding me And if I see that the interpreter's struggling with the fluency and the flow of their signs, then I know what I'm dealing with. But if they're very fluid and fluent, then I feel much more comfortable. There's let's say alerts or red flags that can pop up in the process of getting to know an interpreter. And if it's a serious red flag, then I'll maybe reschedule the appointment. Uh, and so those are opportunities that you can take to see if you're comfortable with the interpreter or not.
Latoya says, yes, Roy Barron, do you want to go ahead? Roy here. Based on my experience, when I have an interpreter come, I'm already excited because I think, okay, communication access is valued for me here. Now, if I have good communication access, that's wonderful. When I don't feel comfortable is when they ask me questions about my beliefs or about my skin color or my ethnicity, a very personal, intrusive questions that I may not feel comfortable asking. Again, communication access is about feeling comfortable and developing that rapport with the deaf person.
Latoya here. Okay, and we have Diana with a question. Go ahead, Diana. Okay, um, as we wait for Diana's video to come up, why don't we go ahead and move on to Juan? Juan has a comment to make. Let's move on to Juan. Okay. Um, yeah, but before, okay, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I've lost my train of thought. Oh gosh. Sorry about that. Yeah, I can't remember what I wanted to say. Oh, no problem.
Diana, okay, you want to? Yes, with the protests or uh, advocacy for people of color, have you seen a rise in colored interpreters?
Roy Barron says, okay, go ahead, Roy. Go ahead and respond to that question. I um I wanted to first say that colored interpreter is not an appropriate term. Does anybody else want to add to that to use to describe a person? Deidre, go ahead. And then after Deidre, it'll be some Roy Jones.
I just wanted to say that I've been going to the Black Lives Matter protest and a lot of the protests that have been happening in Austin with Austin Access to Activism. And I have never seen BIPOC interpreters. Now, I mean, again, there's the issue of placing the burden on them and their issue of safety as well. White interpreters are typically the ones interpreting at protests from what I have seen. Um, Again, the boundaries of BIPOC space and the burden placed on the high demand for BIPOC interpreters and the triggering of the events, right? Police brutality, and those interpreters may have had family members affected by that. And for them to put themselves on the line, even within these spaces where violence may happen, I think is a big detractor for many. And so that is why a lot of white interpreters have stepped in to interpret. And I am thankful for the access at those protests. And it's important not to cross boundaries. We want to have Black interpreters or other interpreters of color, but they need to do their job. And so we need to think about their experience as well.
Latoya here, absolutely. And Roy Jones uh, has something to say. Go ahead, Roy. Okay. Um, I want to share a little history about BIPOC interpreters or interpreting. I've noticed that many BIPOC interpreters, there aren't many to begin with. And this is because many of the ITP programs are unaffordable. They're just not affordable. And when they do, uh, and so what happens is that uh, when they do go to and work in certain settings, they're usually the minority. And so they go to a program and there's not much representation. And so they usually drop in the course of taking those classes. Um, so that was the case historically. BIPOC, uh, BIPOCs had a hard time going to school, to post-secondary, attending post-secondary education. And since then, there's been a lot of support and advocacy to ensure that BIPOC interpreters get certified, participate in the field of interpreting, and to show them that uh, they can also be professionals.
Latoya, thank you so much, Roy. That's a great point. Roy Barron, do you want to add something? Sorry, I think I just wanted to add, go back to the term colored and why that's not appropriate to use. But if anybody else had a comment, we can go back. Deidre? Okay.
Okay. Before I go into discussing the term colored, I want to make sure that I clarify that I don't consider myself fully uh, black because I have a white background. And so colored never really offended me until I took classes and understood um, the negative connotation or just the historical implications of that term. And so, after being educated on the implications, I now recognize it as an inappropriate term, a racist term. And I hope that I've answered your question, Roy.
Yeah, that was a good answer. Yes.
Diego?
I would just like to add, talking about developing more interpreters of color. I see the same thing that others have mentioned. And I think the ITPs are part of the problem. Interpreting programs throughout the US, they are very, very white. They are based on white interpreter perspectives, white norms, white ways of moving through the world professionally, and white professionalism. So how do ITPs support students of color to become interpreters? What does that look like? I don't really see anything. I know that we can do better. We need more interpreters of color. We need more teachers in the ITPs, leading ITPs of color, so that they can change the curriculum. Everything needs to be revamped, and there needs to be more emphasis on advocating for interpreters of diverse backgrounds instead of a one size fits all type of ITP. And so that's why we are not seeing the students coming out of our programs. Consumers are desperately crying for more, but the bottleneck is in the ITPs and the systemic oppression. So I feel that that's a big area for improvement.
Latoya here. Yes. And Roy Jones wants to say something. Go ahead, Roy Jones. I'd like to add to what Diego just said. That is absolutely correct. As I mentioned previously, that in my entire lifetime of using interpreters, I've only seen 3 or 4 BIPOC interpreters. And when I've met a black interpreter, uh, what I see is that their signing is very influenced by whiteness. They have they are um, a replica of a white interpreter, and that their style is painted by whiteness. And I've told them, I want to see you. I'm Roy, and I have my own style and character, I which is painted by my cultural background, my race. I'm a Black person, and that's what I want to see. I want to see Black culture. But the Black interpreters that I've worked with, they have a wall. They have created a wall between them, or this whiteness creates a wall between us. So I'd like to see programs that offer courses that encourages them to be free to express their culture and their linguistic style. Um, I think that the programs currently are designed in such a way that restricts that, constrains them, and so and I think this is because the test for certification is has a certain expectation, and BIPOC interpreters feel like they have to meet that expectation.
Yes, Juan, do you have something? Go ahead. Juan here. What Roy and Diego both said is correct, but also thinking about working into English or another spoken language is important, whether or not that interpreter be Latinx or another from another cultural background. They may sign very well and work into ASL or another sign language well, but we don't know what kind of mistakes they're making. So I want to know if my language and my words are being well represented. Am I being represented to my level of intelligence, or am I being represented as less than? And so, depending on the interpreter, they may not always represent me as I am. Oftentimes, it's not until I talk to somebody and then, they tell me that they had a very different idea of me based on that interpreter's interpretation. And so then there's some back and forth. And I realized this interpreter did not match me as far as register or language choice and did not represent me well.
Latoya here. That is so true. Wow. Okay, so now we've got a question coming from Eddie. EDI. Eddie. Hello. Um, if you were to meet a white interpreter or a BIPOC interpreter, do you see similarities or differences after talking to either one? And thank you.
Diego, you want to respond to that? I do definitely. Hang on just one. Sorry. Yes. So let me start again. Yes, I definitely speak differently with BIPOC interpreters and white interpreters. With white interpreters, I'm very formal. How are you? How's the weather today? Did you watch the show or movie? But with BIPOC interpreters, I go into much more depth. We have good conversations and more, of course, linked to personal experiences, shared cultural commonalities. I have a few interpreters in Austin, maybe 3 or 4 interpreters of color that I really enjoy working with, and we've developed those relationships. And so for events or other jobs, I typically go to them. And so, we'd have good discussions and about home and food and have those connections. But with white interpreters, we do have discussions, but maybe much more on the surface level. I don't feel that same type of connection or trust. It's just different. So, I mean, it's okay, but it's just different. And I don't know if I can put it into words, but it's definitely related to trust, to empathy, and to familiarity.
Mm-hmm. Latoya here, yes. And now we've got Cody with a question. Cody? We're waiting for Cody's video to turn on. Please bear with us. Okay. All right. I've got a two-part question. I'm going to hold off on one of them. You know, at the White House and other political platforms, and you have a man interpreting, and a very handsome man, and he's got jewelry, and he's wearing certain type of clothes. I would like to know, is that a violation of CPC in terms of dress code? This is a common problem that I faced. Now, um, I've thought about this, and I've not ever had any problems with any other people or situations except for this one particular interpreter. Uh, there was one occasion where there was this interpreter who wore gold chains, and I think that what this person was doing was manifesting, constructing their cultural background, and I loved it because it was appropriate to the place. But I often have thought about this and looked through RID literature, and I see that this literature is based on a whiteness, a white driven system. And so what we're learning is learning what RID is telling us through their lens. And this creates barriers. Maybe BIPOC interpreters would like to dress differently, add more to their personality and their character through their dress code of um, way of dressing, but maybe RID restricts them because of the way that they have set up the rules. And I'll ask the other question later.
Roy Barron, did you want to respond to this? Roy here. Maybe I don't have the right answer, but I would say that individual who's interpreting maybe with jewelry might have violated the CPC, in my opinion. Anything that's particularly shiny or bright lipstick or low-cut dress can be very distracting to the message. The cultural aspect should be left at home, which is my opinion. So I guess I don't really have a complete right answer. I have been working as a deaf interpreter for 10 years, not yet certified, hopefully soon. But maybe I will have a better answer for you all in the future.
Yes, Roy Jones, please. Go ahead. Okay, let's see. I just wanted to make sure my video was on. From a BIPOC perspective, of course, they value their culture and their style. I don't mind, quite honestly. Frequently, I don't mind. So long as the attire is not loud, visually distractive. If they wear certain jewelry that is cultural, or, glasses, eyeglasses. I like using different colored eyeglasses. So they want to do that. I like to see a little bit of the interpreter style. I like to see their character and their personality shine forward through how they dress. Um, and again, I agree that what RID says, or the way the standard is, it's from that perspective, a white perspective, and so we don't. There's very little deviation from it. They've created the baseline of the norm, and then maybe the other interpreters are very careful about the way they dress because of labeling. Uh, I, as a deaf consumer, I've worked with many interpreters, and they all look the same, and it's just so boring. What I call dry uh, and bland. And so I like a little bit of character and personality, so long as it's not visually distractive. There's been interpreters who have come and worked with me who have added a little bit of flair to their attire, and I love it. Maybe not so much in a legal setting at a court proceeding. Maybe that would not be appropriate. But in a classroom, I think that would be fabulous. I wouldn't mind it. I think it would help connect us even further. Uh, it would give us an opportunity to talk about, oh, why did you choose that particular garment or jewelry? So I think there should be some flexibility depending on setting. And I'm not saying that what I'm saying applies to every situation.
Yes, Juan, did you want to say something? Juan here. As Cody mentioned, the RID system is very white and mandates certain things in dress, which is true. But I noticed that, people say, oh, you have to wear black. And the top must be black, which I think, and women must dress in black and men must dress in black. I don't know that that's necessarily the case because, depending on the color of skin, black may not be the best choice. You may be like, what is it, just gray or whatever? And why, do men have to wear one color, women wear one color? If we think about interpreting for the president, we see somebody maybe wearing a suit with different colors, a different tie color, shirt color. I see some sexism in play here. As a man, there seems to be more flexibility where women are more restricted in their dress. Um, Again, the CPC codes, I think they need to be adjusted. And then Roy's comment about legal system, I think for me, thinking about the Latino community, we want somebody that we feel comfortable with. If somebody is overdressed, the person may feel uncomfortable and not willing to speak up and may feel like they are less than. So if, the person is dressed nicely, maybe a polo or a nice, I don't know. I don't know that it should be as far out as like a whole suit. Deidre?
Wrong D. Oh, now whether it's in that mainstream or whatever situation, an interpreter will ask me if they're okay with what they're wearing. I'm very flexible with however an interpreter wants to wear their hair, whether it's color or style or dress. But they'll check with me. And one thing that they've mentioned to me is that they've noticed that the white students that they work with are much more picky about the way they dress, the way they look, the way they wear their hair. And that was interesting to me. For instance, here I am, and I have some facial jewelry. And if anyone was to tell me, you got to take that off, I'm going to say, no, this is part of who I am, represents my personality, my character, and so I do think that that the system is saturated with whiteness, and they are the ones creating the standards. And I'm not really keen on that because I want to see more personality, and I don't like the idea of interpreters just following that one standard. That's where I stand with that.
Latoya, yes, I agree. Diego. I would like to, it's interesting to hear everybody's opinion, and I feel the same on as far as being yourself. But thinking about the CPC and the dress code, I think it often takes away the identities of interpreters in general and makes them vessels of communication. But they're also people. And I also just want to recognize how white interpreters use that code as a weapon to criticize other interpreters in the field, whether it be their team or colleagues or whatever. I see how the CPC is very powerful because white interpreters tend to default to the CPC to make a point about such and such interpreter, about how they're not good or how they're not a good fit and so forth. And so that to me is a sign of where they're at and who they are and how they respect or disrespect others, other different cultural values or belief systems. And they weaponize the CPC. And I don't know if you all have noticed the situation or about the black male interpreter. I don't remember what event it was. It was for a big event when he was on camera, and then somebody posted it on Twitter. And there were so many comments about how he was hot, how he was good looking, and people were reposting, and it just made me so upset because they're looking at this man as a hot man instead of as an interpreter. So again, I notice how hearing people's view again is different of the interpreter, and they actually sexualize that person rather than thinking about the fact that he was giving access. So anyway, it's just an interesting analysis.
Latoya here. Very good point. Absolutely. Okay, do we have any more questions? Oh, we've got one from Megan. Oh, I'm sorry, not Megan. Cody. Go ahead, Cody. Wow, the responses have been wonderful. And I think it's important that we reflect internally and externally and understand that there is diversity. And I think there's big changes need to be made to the CPC. I'm sorry about the bright light coming in. Is this a little bit better? Okay, so I want to move on to that second question. And this is a hot topic. Uh, and in the realm of a legal setting. Now, now I show up as a deaf interpreter, and I want to clarify. I'm a white I'm a white person, and so I go in there, and I work with a BIPOC interpreter, and this BIPOC interpreter is working with the general audience, and I'm working with the defense team, and the person in this team, there's a Latino and a BIPOC person, and what I witness is a just outright oppression of this person's rights, and denying them access to language. And what I notice is that this has a direct impact to the CDI who's working in the same setting, a black interpreter, and I see them become agitated, and I want to work with this person. um I'm a white person. Should I let them just lose their blow their lid, so to speak, or do I confront them and talk to them and try to calm them down? I'm also working within the system, you know and the system has certain ethics on how we're supposed to comport ourselves in these settings. So how do I handle this situation? And thank you.
Juan, do you want to respond to that? Juan here. Cody, yes, thank you. That has happened to me in the past. I have had white hearing interpreters and a white CDI in a court setting, and certain things have happened that have really angered me or made me cry, made me upset. Uh, I see so many injustices, and when I left and when we finished, I really cried. I had, I felt all those emotions, anger, upset, and I needed somebody to support. I think having a mentor or a family member or somebody that can support you in those moments, somebody that you can call right away to vent to share those emotions is going to be important. You can't hold those in. It's important to have mentors. It's important to have, backup, siblings, family. Just how you approach it, it's not going to be easy. I'll be honest, it's never easy. But when work is finished, can you talk to your team? Can you share? Will they learn something? I mean, maybe that person's not interested and they just say, okay, bye. And that even may grow your feelings of anger. But that's why it's important to have mentors and people who can support you in those moments.
Latoya, uh, Roy Jones would like to say something. Okay, I'd like to add to what Juan just said. The legal system, it's like supersedes in many cases even just the regular system. uh BIPOCs have been fighting against this particular infrastructure within the oppressive system that we live in. And as Juan suggested, have a team, uh, a friend, a family member, someone that you can talk to, who you have a very strong bond with. Develop a comfort zone with them, and don't leave it at that. Approach the legal system, approach the representatives of uh, the legal system, and talk to them about what you're seeing, the oppression. Provide some tips and advice, and help them see uh, what is happening. And perhaps in the next case, they'll bring in the correct people. I mean, it's highly improbable that that would happen, but that's the best. That's something that we can do as CDIs in that situation.
Latoya says, yes, now we have a question from Jody. Jody, you have a question? Jody here. Yes, thank you. So the issue of dress and communication and language and all of that, I'm wondering about body language. Um, I guarantee in classes this is going to come up, right? Like,
I teach visual gestural communication, for instance.
Jody, you froze for a moment. Oh, can you see me?
Could you repeat yourself, Jody? Could you repeat it? Your video froze, so please repeat your question.
Yes, about body language and the importance of body language. So thinking about internalized beliefs and values, that will influence your body language, your facial expressions, how you present yourself, because 78% of the message is transmitted not through the words, but through the body language. So I'm wondering, especially in BIPOC communities or gay communities or other communities, for example, when you go to the doctor and they ask you questions about sex, how does the interpreter interpret that question about being sexually active? What does the deaf person see on that interpreter's face? So again, thinking about how you're inclusive of all those things.
Diego, go ahead and respond to that question. Okay, so let me share a little bit of my background. I was born and raised in the Rio Grande Valley. It's a small region of South Texas, and it's a predominantly Hispanic Latino community. I lived, breathed, and ate with probably 98% Latinos, Hispanics, and um, and I think that between for about 3 or 4 years, I worked with this one particular interpreter, a white woman, very neat lady, but oh gosh, um, I'll always remember being agitated. For instance, I was taking a Spanish class, and I took this class from the 6th to the 10th grade, and this interpreter was from the 6th to the ninth grade, and she was with me not only in my Spanish classes but all my other classes, and all of my teachers were Hispanic, Mexican American, or Latinos, and uh, and it's very common for Spanish to be thrown in, for our language to be peppered with Spanish or something that we call Spanglish. And I would notice that when Spanish was used in the class, the interpreter gave this gesture that I just demonstrated, and would look away. And I said, "What's the matter?" "Oh, I did not understand what the teacher said," and it made me feel bad for some reason. I felt guilty that this person was imposed in an through my language. But I would notice those facial expressions whenever Spanish, or the conversation was peppered with some Spanish, and it made me feel guilty, ashamed, anxious. Eventually, I would let go, but at the same time, I would hold on to it. And even today, I look back and think about that interpreter and the impact that their expression, body language, had on how I felt, which was to feel horrible about my language and my culture. And this can stay with you. It's traumatic. And so when I go to an event that is Latino themed, I remember that interpreter. It doesn't go away. Like, you see, I'm doing a lot of different things as that's a next person, a trans person, and then I have a white interpreter that comes in and gives me certain facial expressions that are not warm and welcoming. And what I do is call the agency and say, I don't ever want to work with that interpreter again. Body language plays a huge role. It has a huge impact. So yeah, very critical component.
Latoya says yes. Um, did you tell that interpreter? I'm just wondering, did you ever confront that interpreter about her behavior?
Yes. She gave me hell and I gave her hell. But what can you do? I said, hey, why were you so mean about it? That was rude. You should learn Spanish. You know sign language, you know English, learn Spanish. What's the big deal? Hey, she gave me other looks, resistance. But I would pester her. I'd give her a hard time. But she really never opened up and even discuss it or consider it. She'd always shrug her shoulder. She's just an arrogant interpreter, quite frankly. Yeah, I don't know. That's how it was.
Sorry, Roy here. Yes, I had a question for Diego. So in that situation that you went through, that's a very unfortunate situation. How do you make that situation better in future experiences? With that understanding and the interpretation that you have now, how do you affect the future situations? What can you do?
Yeah. Can you all see me? Just want to make sure you can see me. Well, what I was only 12 years old at the time, and I was highly motivated to learn Spanish because all of my family spoke it. My mother, my father, my aunts, my tia, all of them. And so how do you address that at that age and say, hey, I mean, I would say, when Spanish is spoken, can you ask what it means and then tell me what was said? And she give me an exasperated look, like she like was such a burden. And I said, I just want to know. But the interpreter gave me the impression that it was making her job harder, more burdensome, and that I was somehow a nuisance. And so I was stuck with this situation. There was no one that I could go talk to. I was in mainstream in a poor district, in a mainstream program in a poor district. I was the only deaf person in that district, and this was pretty much the only interpreter that they assigned to work with me or they worked with. There wasn't anybody that I could go to that could come in and assess their attitude and address and provide consequences. It was a very difficult time. So I just stopped asking her, what was the Spanish that was said? Can you ask the teacher what it means? Because of her attitude. And I did not want her attitude to somehow affect the teacher and the culture that we had established in our classroom either. It was a very difficult experience. And I think that's why I still burn over it. Looking back, would I have done something differently? Maybe told my mom, told my mom, because my mother was a very awesome advocate for me. Why didn't I tell my mom? I don't know. Maybe I had internalized something here. Maybe I was disgusted by this and I didn't want to talk to my mother about it. Shame. Yeah, I don't. I think it just comes down to shame.
That comes up for me, so just wondering. Thank you.
And thank you for your question.
Roy Jones. Roy here. I just wanted to add that body language is huge. It makes a huge impact on the deaf community. For me, growing up mainstreamed, well, I was the only deaf person in the mainstream setting. And I was the only deaf person because the other deaf kids went to self-contained classrooms. So I was the only one with hearing kids. And so anyway, until I was older, I was the youngest in the family, but it wasn't until I was older that I really realized that I was gay. And I was in the closet. I had a lot of confusion, but once I realized who I was and came out as gay and was more myself, to that day, um, I took an STD test and I had an interpreter come in for that. I didn't know them and was interacting with them. I didn't know their identity, but they told me that they were gay as well. And so in that moment, I felt so much more comfortable because I knew that they were going to understand my sexuality, certain cultural things. And so I was very comfortable talking with that person, answering questions and, being myself. I felt like I could tell them whatever. Um, and I was taking these tests every 3 to 4 months. And at one time I had a woman interpreter come in and I don't know, it was just, she would ask questions, top, bottom, I don't know. They were just the way that she asked them were so very awkward. And it was a weird, awkward situation. And most of it was due to her body language and her facial expressions. And I was like, what it like her vibe that she was giving is like, what's all this stuff about being gay? What's all this about? And then after we finished, like she was like, how does this work? And I I just felt like, you know what, lady, this is not your business. See you later. Bye. But it was her body language. And that really, really did a number on me and made me feel so uncomfortable. I think that body language, you have to find the person with the right fit. And unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of gay men interpreters to choose from, right? There's these different communities that are limited and it influences our choices on who we want as interpreter.
Latoya here, absolutely. Deidre, go ahead. Yeah, I agree with what Roy Jones is saying. I get that response as well. I'll have an appointment and my partner is female, and I'll let them know. I'll let the interpreter know, and they give me this facial expression. That it there's a hesitation. It doesn't just I say my partner's a woman, and then there's like this hesitation and disruption to the flow, and it makes me feel awkward when I see that, because what I have gotten from that response is that the interpreter doesn't feel comfortable that my partner is a woman. And it's like, okay, look, we have our own identities, our own sexual orientations, and can you not express that? Can you, kind of rein in the facial expression and your body language? But that is often the reaction that I get facially or, body wise, whether it's at a dentist's office or whatever. Hmm.
Latoya here. Yes, Juan, did you want to say something? Juan here. Yes, now in 2021, right? We're not in 1950 anymore, right? We're in 2021. Okay, just making sure. But now when you go to the doctor, whatever, if you are sharing information, and I notice for me, if I mentioned that I'm a gay dad or whatever, and I get this reaction from an interpreter, like, wait, did you adopt your kid, or did you really have penetration to have your kid? Like, no kidding, they asked me that. I was like, okay. Or the doctor will be saying something, and then uh before I meet the doctor, I will my preferred word is queer. And then I'll get this pushback like, no, that's a negative word. And I like say, Sharon, no, this is the word that I feel comfortable with. And this is what I choose for my identity. And again, what the interpreter does, do they follow my preferences? Do they push back against it? Do they criticize me? It's not about the interpreter. It's not about these things. Follow the words and the chosen, especially for identities for a deaf person, you know, uh, Latino, queer, dad, and then the interpreter. Sometimes I get this attitude of like, okay, even if you're a new interpreter, take the words that are given to you. Maybe in your mind, you may think it doesn't make sense or you may think it's stupid, but whatever, take it and run with it.
Diego, go ahead. Um, Sorry, I was already commenting before my video came up. I'd like to share an experience with you. It was a medical appointment, and oh crap, there was this interpreter that showed up, and I had never seen this interpreter before. I usually work with a pool of interpreters consistently, but it so happened that that day none of them were available except for this different interpreter that showed up. The experience was actually a little bit stressful, but anyway, the doctor asked, "How many sexual partners do you have?" And I said, "I think I have four." And we were just having that discussion, and I mentioned that 2 nights ago I had a threesome, and then the other night I had, and the interpreter was like, hold on, what did you say?" We actually had a full on awkward moment. I was like, yeah, what's the matter? Do you have a problem? The interpreter said, no, no, I just want to clarify. Did you say you had two people at the same time? Or did you have uh, an experience with one person and then the other? I said, no, two people with me at the same time. That's what threesome is. But this person, the interpreter was obviously shocked. And I thought, why would you take this job, a medical setting? because any topic could arise. The unexpected could, arise. But why did you? But anyway, it happens. But there's people out there that are not like you, and there may be into different things. Be open and flexible. Move along. People do differently, things differently. So don't look so surprised or shocked when those things happen, because when you make it that obvious, it makes the other person feel what, like they're a freak. That's what I felt, like I was a freak or something. I don't know.
Latoya, thank you for sharing that. I now want to go to Megan for a question. Can you see me? We can see you, Megan. Okay. Before Trump or since Trump, I have seen more. Do you all see more racist interpreters? And if so, what do you do? Are the interpreters accountable for their racist behavior?
Oh, great question. Good question. Latoya. Um, Roy Jones, go ahead. Yeah, that's a very good question. I think presently BIPOCs are going through a lot of racism. There's been a lot of discussions and panels over the years, and I've had to address that question time and again. And it seems like again I've had to do it. It's a message that we've had to address again and again, and it's not necessarily a huge issue to do that, but it is seems vampiric, very consuming, the topic of uh, racism. Now, for all of you who support Republicans, I'm sorry for what I'm about to say, but I am so thrilled that Trump is gone. Now, the political view, the Republican political view, that's quite all right. I don't really care. But if you bring up anything that is racist, anything negative, because you are in this space to mediate language, and if you happen to mediate language and information for people on that side of the political spectrum, that's quite all right. But when you take on um, the persona and even dress up as the folks, then you are not no longer neutral. You got to keep it neutral. See, what will often happen is that this interpreter who worked with this particular group and expressed or relayed mediated very racist messages, and then goes and works with the BIPOC community, the BIPOC community is going to be very uncomfortable working with this interpreter because they saw them in that role, in that position. So an interpreter should keep their strong opinions, whether they're religious or political, separate from their work. And now, if they go on social media, then just keep in mind that that could be triggering to BIPOCs who have experienced oppression and racism, and they might not feel comfortable with you working with them.
Latoya, yes, yes. I also think it's important that interpreters examine themselves and recognize their own biases and do that work. Yes, Diego, you wanted to say something. Diego here. I have respect for interpreters who do that self-analysis and really look for their own biases in politics or in other areas, because how is that person going to represent me? Are they going to jump in, head first, or are they really against these ideas? And so I'm hesitant to work with an interpreter who may be resistant to some of these ideas. When you are processing information, how you do that from one language to another, I mean, it can be we don't always see that, right? But you can produce harm to the community in multiple ways that you may not even recognize yourself unless somebody brings it to your attention, like, hey, did you really mean this? Because this is what I saw. And a lot of my friends, I mean, I'll be very open, I'm far on the left as far as the political spectrum, and a lot of my interpreter friends um, turn down any kind of events for Trump or anything on the right. And what they say is that, I know I'm biased. I don't know, I cannot be neutral in this position. And that you need to find an interpreter that's a better fit. I applaud that. And I hope that, Trump supporters who have far right political leanings would do the same and would not take a job that goes against their own political beliefs, because you may not see your own bias that you're imparting when you are doing that message mediation, because it impacts communities. And I don't believe that people can be completely neutral and just impart message, because no language is neutral. No language, no matter what languages you're working between, it's impossible to be completely neutral. So those are just my thoughts about bias.
Latoya here. Very good point. Wow. Asia. Asia's next.
Hello. Is he okay? My question about voicing. Personally, try represent their culture. I don't want whitewash. I don't want that. I want to show culture, red, beautiful, maybe like word choice, but and so I don't want. I know white.
So for example, if I want to represent a particular culture or background when voicing for a deaf person, I don't want to insult them. I don't want to exaggerate whatever their culture is. I want to be respectful, but I do want to show how beautiful their culture is, and maybe allow for their identity expression a little bit. I don't want to whitewash. So how do I do that?
Latoya here. Roy Jones, go ahead. This will be my last response. I have to leave, but I'm going to go ahead and make a quick comment. Let's say, for instance, Juan mentioned earlier that culture plays a very important part in his community, in his family. So it's really important to take maybe 10 minutes before the assignment to interact with the individual and get to know them. It's not a moment to interrogate, of course not, but just to understand what the person's background is culturally and linguistically. And in the process of doing that, uh, now let's say that the individual talks about the particular cultural components that maybe I won't understand. And if we determine that so much of it is going to have an impact in my ability to interpret for this person, then we might have to agree to reschedule this appointment. And but if maybe you are able to, maybe you can just jump in and learn some more. Like for instance, I am biracial, black and white. I have a lot of Latinx friends who've taught me about their culture, their food, their signs. So I've gotten to I've familiarized myself with some of their cultural aspects, and they feel comfortable with me and they welcome me because I've become familiar with their culture and their language and their food. And so you can do the same thing. Now, I don't approach my questions in like a very intrusive manner because I don't want them to feel offended or go on guard. Um, so ask questions, but if you don't want to expose yourself, then and you just want to remain in your own comfort zone, then you can only probably just work in within your own abilities in the white world or setting. But if you really want to work with diverse populations, then I encourage you to get to know other people of different backgrounds, racial and ethnic backgrounds. Like for instance, codas. I noticed that codas I work with very well because is somehow inherently they're very willing to work with all types of deaf people. But interpreters who stick by the code of ethics, they come across as ice cubes to me, and there's a wall between them. So that's a tip that I would give to y'all. And thank you, and thank you for having me. I am gonna be running now.
Latoya says, thank you for being part of the panel. Thank you so much, Roy.
Fallon, we got Fallon. Asia, Asia, do you mind? Asia, do you mind muting yourself? Please mute yourself, Asia.
Hello, thank you all. This is wonderful. I have 2 points of view, myself as a consumer as well as a CDI. And I have seen many things that have made me agree wholeheartedly from both perspectives. As a CDI, I hate it when I show up to work and we're all white and the consumer is a person of color. I always feel like shame and awkwardness and embarrassment in those situations. Is often when I work with hearing interpreters. One time I went and the hearing interpreter was Black, and I had such a different experience. I felt like I was able to connect to the consumer better because of the presence of the Black interpreter. So obviously they had a connection, the communication was there. At the same time, that consumer and I had a connection because we were deaf. So I had a question as a consumer working with interpreters. Um, you know, do interpreters have to be part of the deaf community? A lot of them aren't really part of the deaf community. I often feel like I'm not able to connect with them. So what about BIPOC deaf people? What is your feelings, or what is your need for connection with other interpreters?
Latoya, anybody want to take that? This is a pretty long question. Roy Barron is going to go ahead and take that question. I don't know if I have a complete response to that. I grew up in a white deaf school. I grew up working with many white interpreters. I did not really establish that type of connection. And it wasn't until I went to a place where there was more Black people that I started to connect with BIPOC interpreters, Black interpreters. And at the same time, during that time, I was also learning about myself, my identity. And again, I recommend pre-conferencing before the job, a pre-job conferencing, talking about particular backgrounds. The CDI might want to know whether the deaf person came from mainstream school or deaf school. Now, for the hearing interpreter, I'm not quite sure which questions would be appropriate to ask. Um, I'm still learning about that question and how to answer that question. So it's an ongoing struggle for me. And at the same time, I think we should go ahead and wrap up the session. Uh, Now, I typically tell the interpreters, put the seeds in the ground. Go ahead, plant them, and grow yourself. And what that entails is being able to accept criticism. And as it rains and the winds come, and this is like an analogy, a metaphor, that is going to take a lot of challenges and frustrations. But as time goes by, you're going to grow stronger and stronger, just as a seed that is challenged and exposed uh, to different weather patterns grows into a very strong tree. So, accept your mistakes, recognize when you've made your mistakes. The more that you're accepting of the feedback, the more beautiful of a tree you will be. And that's all I've got to say. I want to thank you for the invitation. I've learned so much from it as well.
Toya says, yes, absolutely. Thank you so much to the whole panel. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your questions. This has been a wonderful experience, and I hope you all have learned how to delve more deeply into diverse communities. Interpreters, you are awesome. Awesome job. Fantastic. So now, if you would not mind, panel, can you all, those on the panel, can you please stay for just a moment? Very briefly, we're going to have an announcement for the panel. For the students, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for your questions. I hope you have learned and continue to learn and grow and become better and better interpreters. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye. Panel, please remain for